all did know that the film would have a television broadcast on independent lens. It would have a PBS broadcast, which meant we knew we were going to be able to reach 98% of American households who have a TV. We knew that the film was going to come out the same year of the 50th anniversary of the founding of the party, but beyond that, we didn't know what we could do with the film. So we began to think about how we could work with the film. And we crafted a timeline, and the timeline involved when the film was finished in late 2014, we knew that the film would go to the Sundance Film Festival, and we could do a festival run. We knew that we were going to have to raise money for if we wanted a theatrical run, so we planned a crowdfunding campaign to do that. We knew PBS put some money and support behind a theatrical run. We knew that was going to be part of our year-long effort, and we knew that we were going to have a PBS broadcast in 2015. So by the end of 2016. So by the end of 2014, we essentially had a little over a year to reach the kind of people that we wanted to reach with this film. We knew with a PBS audience we would be able to reach a very broad audience, but we really wanted to reach millennials of color who we knew were not probably going to be, who we didn't think would tune into a PBS broadcast. So we thought about the ways that we could reach them over that full year. And we thought about reaching them online, in community settings, in theaters, if the film got to their theater, got to their community, and through festivals. And so what we did was try to craft a campaign to reach those folks, our target audience, the hardest audience for us to try to reach, the most important for us as an organization to reach with this story. And we crafted a campaign to try to reach those folks. What we hoped to do with the film was a few things. We really wanted to make sure this film deepened our national understanding of the Black Panther Party. More than deepen, we wanted to reframe the way the party was considered and understood. As folks who'd been working with, Freedom Riders and Freedom Summer, we knew what happened when people saw these courageous Americans standing up for their rights and being celebrated when the films came out. We wanted that same kind of love and adoration and support for Panthers when this film came out. We wanted people to see Panthers as heroes, and we wanted people to see Panthers as themselves. And so that kind of reframing of the history of the Panthers was really important to us as a goal for our engagement and impact. We wanted the story of the Panthers to inspire the next generation, and we wanted them, organizers and people who have been politically conscious recently, to think about how the lessons that they could learn from the Panthers' growth and the Panthers' fall. And we thought that kind of lesson was really important. We wanted to put today's organizing and sort of our political moment in a historical context, and we wanted to, as much as we could, support organizing around the issues that the film addresses. The way we did that was partner with organizations that are at the forefront of both political and cultural organizing, put the film in their hands, work with them to advise us on the strategy for the film, have them work with their members across the country to bring them out to events, to screenings, to moderate conversations, to frame the film, to be essentially the people who connected this historical doc to their current work. We wanted to involve the Panthers in as many ways, in as many cities, as much as possible. We wanted them to embrace the film, and whenever they did, we were really pleased. When they didn't, we understood, and we tried to reach other Panthers. So Panther involvement was really key. We tried to recruit influencers who could reach our audience that we knew were going to be difficult for us to reach on our own with no budget. And those people were the artists, the organizers, the bloggers, the writers who reach the folks who we wanted to reach. And then we wanted to arm them with the film. We wanted to give them advanced copies of the film. We wanted to show them the film as early as possible so they knew it was coming and they were ready for it when it came to their city in a theater, in a festival, and on television. We gave them short clips. We gave them images. We gave them as much as we could so that they could infuse the story of the Panthers and the film into their work. The kinds of organizations we work with are organizations we've worked with many times in the past for our other films. Some new folks came to the table, but really we were thinking about who is at the forefront of cultural and political organizing around police brutality, government surveillance and repression of activists, women's leadership, cultural organizing. And these were the kinds of organizations that came to the table a year before the broadcast. Panthers were involved in many activities over the year, and we showed the film to the Panthers, who were in the film before essentially anyone else, privately, and we began to listen to what the response was. And Panthers are Ericka will speak to it, but Panthers are not a homogenous group. And the responses were varied. But for the folks, I think we found that where the film really resonated was not necessarily the leaders, but the rank and file. And that's really interesting, because if this was a traditional marketing campaign, you'd want the leaders to be the face of your promotional push. They have the name recognition. Because the film kind of tells a story that really highlights, I think, what the experience is like for rank and file members in the party, and there are a few films, I think, about the Panthers that have done that. This film was embraced by rank and file members in a way that I think surprised us and made us really happy. And what that meant, there's more rank and file members than leaders in the party. So that meant that in every city, we could involve rank and file members who maybe had never spoken about their experience in their time in the Panthers publicly, who never were able to stand up in front of a group of people in a theater and say, I'm a proud Panther, and this is what my time in the party meant to me. This is how it politicized me. This is how that political moment has shaped my life since then. They could talk about political prisoners they were still connected to and trying to raise money and attention for. And they could also answer the questions that audiences have, which is, what's the legacy of the Panthers, and what lessons do you have for today's young organizers in Black Lives Matter? They wanted to be the people answering those questions, and we were really happy that so many Panthers, dozens and dozens of Panthers across the country, attended events, tweeted, went on press junkets, were just involved all across the country. Then we thought, and we started to recruit influencers, and these were kind of high-profile folks who have big social media followings and who reach the kind of folks that we were trying to reach. And we involved them in many ways. Some folks like Ava DuVernay moderated Q&As in theaters in Los Angeles. Some folks tweeted and were part of a tweet chat, and we gave them facts about the Panther Party to dispel myths about the Panthers, and they tweeted that stuff out to their members. We invited influencers, artists, to take over our social media pages for a day or a week and say, you are the Black Panther Party film page. What are you going to do with this page? And then they just ran with it. We got Ericka Badu to DJ a party with the film. So as many ways that we could plug these folks in and they could embrace the film and embrace the issues in the film and frame it for the folks who follow them, we tried to involve them. I put Macklemore on there. He wasn't an influencer, but that tweet is just hilarious to me, because he was learning as you watch the film. Bless his heart for learning. I just had to put it up there. And then we thought about the places, and the folks who were advising us told us about the places where the film had to be, where conversations were happening about Black radical politics. Black Lives Matter folks were going to be convening. Our folks told us we had to take the film to Ferguson. The Panthers and Stanley went to Ferguson and did a screening for community members and organizers there. Wherever there were conversations, strategic conversations that needed to be had and that could be influenced by the history of the Panther Party, we made sure we tried to bring the film there. So if that meant Representative Barbara Lee wanted to take the film to Capitol Hill, we made sure that that could happen as well. So from grassroots to grass tops, we were trying to inform as many conversations and organizing spaces with the film that we could. And then we thought about what kind of conversations were happening online. In the year leading up to the broadcast, Black Twitter has been on fire for many years, but certainly leading a number of really important conversations in online spaces. So between sort of, obviously Black Lives Matter, but Oscar's So White and sort of representation of our own stories, Say Her Name, that sort of lifts up the experience and the disproportionate amount of Black women who are murdered or at the hands of both state violence and police violence. Formation, Black women's sort of liberation. And when we thought about those conversations that were happening online, we tried to, as much as possible, create content from the film that riffed on those same subjects, that could deepen our understanding of those subjects, that could inform those conversations, put those into the hands of our influencers, of our partners, and help to kind of infuse the current conversations with the history of the Panthers. And then Beyonce did her thing a week before the broadcast, and that really put the Panthers in a national conversation in a way that we couldn't have expected. But what was really, there was a lot great about it, but what was really, really great is that by the time this happened, a week before the national PBS broadcast, you know, it was a moment that people, you know, were able to kind of either celebrate the Panthers or vilify the Panthers. And the backlash around the Panthers began almost immediately after this Super Bowl event. And what was really great is that at that point, there were now dozens and dozens of national organizations that have been working around this film for a year. There were dozens of artists and organizers and bloggers that have been working with this film for a year. Panthers obviously were ready to respond, but certainly the fact that now we had this moment where people wanted to counter, again, a very negative frame around the Panthers and who they meant to this country and who they mean to us now. Now we have all these folks who are so poised and ready to respond. And for that reason, by the time our broadcast hit a week later, I think the numbers and the conversations online really reflected the fact that there was an army of folks who were very comfortable speaking to the Panther legacy, speaking to the repression and the suppression of Panthers, and they were ready to correct that narrative and reframe it and stand up for the Panthers. So that, I think, is really part of the success of the broadcast and the success of the campaign. So none of that could have happened, and Firelight kind of held a lot of this activity, but none of it could have happened without the folks here on the panel who really powered this campaign. And really none of it could have happened without someone like Ericka Huggins, who is a Black Panther leader and whose story is the foundation really of what the film documented. So I want to bring her up and turn it over to her and let her talk a little bit about her experience both traveling with the film, responding to the film as a Panther, and talking to audiences about Panther legacy.
Good evening, everybody. But I am blocking myself from all of you here. I wanted to sit so that we could have conversation. Thank you so much for coming to this particular panel, and thank you, Sonya and Wendy and everybody who had anything to do with organizing and getting us together. And thank you and you and you and you. And Malkia's mom, Janet, was a member of the Black Panther Party. I wanted you to know that. I want to say that the reason why I engaged with the film is not because I love it. It's because it is a platform for conversation that needs to happen among us. Not just among us, but among us. And we're still on the fence about having those conversations wherever we are with whoever we're with. Conversations about racial, gender, equity. Conversations about the way in which the cradle-to-prison pipeline still functions, and we can each have something to do with it. Conversations about how the history then and our experiences and the history we're making now are too similar. Similar in great ways, that there is always movement in our country, and particularly, I want to say, in Oakland. For those of you who may not be from Oakland, Oakland is always, as I said to someone earlier today, having a movement moment. And the other great similarity is all of the wonderful organizations that have been created by and supported by young people who do, unlike the Black Panther Party, know how to take care of themselves personally and as a group. that is a priority from what I know. One of the things that resonated with me, though, about the film is what Sonya said about the faces and names that don't reach mass media and weren't part of the mainstream media demonizing of the Black Panther Party. The other thing that I love is that women are speaking. I would love films, and Stanley asked in Berkeley, that the next filmmakers who talk about the Black Panther Party be young women of color, and people stomped their feet and yelled and acted a fool, because it's the truth. Women filmmakers are so important. So I don't want to say much more. I traveled as far as and as wide as I could with the film. I didn't work for Firelight or PBS or Independent Lens, but I felt that it's important to bring myself to wherever there are young people in particular who want to know the real history of the United States, and especially young people of color, and especially young women of color. So I want to thank you for being here and participating, hopefully, in the conversation that will ensue after we speak a little while. I didn't cover all my little points, but I want to give time to others. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk more.
Go down the list. So next up is Malkia Cyril. Malkia is a writer, communications strategist, media activist, co-founder of the Media Action Grassroots Network, co-founder and executive director at the Center for Media Justice, and a proud member of the Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter. Malkia, we'll talk about it, but Malkia is also a Panther Cub and played a number of roles throughout the whole campaign: advisor, influencer, conversation moderator, and Malkia is going to talk about experience.
Okay, there we go. My mom's name was Janet Cyril, and she always used to tell me, once a Panther, always a Panther. And, I took that to heart because I grew up in the 80s. I'm 42 years old. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And growing up in the 80s in Brooklyn, New York, I don't know if anybody know about, who else grew up in the 80s? Anybody here? Okay. So, it was a time full of media criminalization of young people, young black people. The terms kind of welfare queen and crack baby and all of this type of racist language was part of the narrative around blackness at that time. And my mom, she was cast out from her family as a Panther. And so she built a new family, a family of Panthers. And so I grew up with my uncles and my aunties. I see my uncle Jamal Joseph is in the film, and others, my uncle Kamal Siddiqui, who's incarcerated in Georgia right now for life, and is the father of Asada's daughter, Asada Shakur's daughter. And this is who I grew up with as my family, right? And which also means that I grew up with, stuck kind of between the legacy of pride and of organizing and of serve the people and of militancy. And then also, on the other hand, this legacy of state violence, this legacy of colonial violence, living in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, this clear juxtaposition of economic violence, right, giving us crumbs, police violence, force, and then the media violence, the lies that were told about this movement in this country. And the first person in there is my mom, right up front there, walking. And I like this picture because Miss Panther sisters, people and I love it. The sister Robin, what's her last name? Walker? Spencer. Walker's a different Robin. Okay, Robin Spencer did a little presentation about women in the party, and she spoke about my mom, but more broadly, what I loved about it was how she talked about, women's militancy in the party. And one of the things that I wanted to start off with here is to say that, one of the greatest lessons that I was able to gain is the idea that women are not just about serving the people, they're also sometimes about picking up these guns and making other kinds of things happen. So the idea that women can be militant and that serve the people can be a militant stance and a militant strategy for change is something that I think the Panthers brought to the United States and brought to black politics in a way that I think is beautiful. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, and that is why I was so interested in the film, both because I felt like it talked to a lot of women, you know, in a way that I had not seen work about the Panthers do in the past. And I felt also that it talked to women who were able to bring in this perspective around rank and file members also, which had not been talked about, I feel like, in the past and in other works that I'd seen. So this was a personal thing for me, is the point, right? This was not just because I care about social change. It's not just because we're in a moment of political reawakening around Black Lives Matter. It's because my mom told me once a Panther, always a Panther, which means not just her, but me too. That means not just me, but my children. It means not just my children, but theirs. So that's what it means to me. And so this film was a way to carry that legacy forward, and I wanted to work with it. I feel like the other thing I wanted to communicate, if I can, bam. So beyond just the issues that were personal to my heart, there was also the fact that growing up as a Panther Cub is also a very isolating experience. It's an experience where you can't talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things you can't tell other people, and it's very different from how a lot of other people grew up. My mom was convinced and certain that what we needed to do is we needed to live in the hoodiest part of the hood so that we could stay connected to our people. And that meant things for her children, right? That had consequences for her children. But one of the things that she cared a lot about was making sure that the narrative of the party and the reality of the party was known, both was known to us. And so I bring this up because narrative is so often left out of the story. The question of how the media, what role the media has played in developing our understanding of history is often it's not as addressed as we need it to be, right? And, living in a time where we have journalism has been completely gutted, investigative journalism is pretty much no more. I mean, every now and again you get a good story, but for the most part, we don't have it. The only place to be able to really dig into the narratives of Black lives and really dig into Black humanity and Black dignity is in film, right? That's the only long-form way to tell a deep story about Blackness or about anything, really. And that wasn't always true. Like, there were other ways to tell stories at different points in time. That's not true anymore. And that's not necessarily ever been true for Black people, but there were other ways to tell stories, and now there aren't. Okay, now we need film more than ever. I bring this up because in my mom's day, one of the ways people tried to tell their own story and plead their own cause was through the Black Panther paper. And this is something that has a rich legacy. I mean, we fought for ethnic media in the 70s. We fought for control of radio in the 60s. Television in the 60s. We fought for radio in the 50s. And today we're fighting to keep an internet open. And I bring this up because one of the things I thought was so important about the film was the way it used social media to connect with audiences. And we talked about that a minute ago. The thing about it is, you can only use the internet to reach audiences if the internet is open and available to you, right? If it's not, then you can't use it. So, just like for the one event that we did at, what was the theater? You remember? Yeah, the Piedmont Theater. And we did an event over there with Firelight around the film, and the Center for Media Justice and Black Lives Matter partnered to do that event. And one of the things that was so important about it is this. We partnered here, Black Lives Matter and Center for Media Justice, to do an action outside of AT&T about being able to. We partnered to protest AT&T's high prices, right? And the reason I think these two things are connected is this. right now, we act like the internet or the digital world can fix the problem of the lack of investigative journalism, or can fix the problem that we have around telling these stories and telling these narratives. It can't, though, right? We still need these alternative structures. We still need the capacity to control the internet, which we don't have. So you see these faces and you see these images because we connected the idea, the same idea that the Panthers once fought for, the right to our narrative, the right to our stories, the housing, food, education. These are all the same fights we're fighting today, but we're doing it in a digital context. And so whether it's 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, or we're talking about 2016, the fight for narrative and the fight for story is part of the fight for Black lives. And then, oh, I did that. Okay. I don't know what that photo is there for, but violence. Police violence. I'm gonna just leave it at that. And the last thing I'll say is this. I don't know if y'all heard about Jasmine Richards. So for those who don't know about Jasmine Richards is a Pasadena Black Lives Matter organizer who recently was convicted and sentenced on a charge of lynching. And I bring this up because of this. Right now we're living in a moment where the police state is terrifying, where, all of the technology that is available to the police is being used to surveil and to track Black people and other people of color, and it's to quell dissidence. That is no different than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. They just didn't have the technology that they have today. But the partnerships between phone companies, the media, and the police are exactly like the partnerships between cell phone companies and technology companies and the police and the mainstream cable today. So the basic relations of power haven't shifted. And that's why it's so critical that we have films that allow us to place ourselves in context. Because like we said in San Francisco, as we marched around Mario Woods, we said we're hungry for justice. But we're not only hungry for justice, we're also hungry for history. And we're hungry for context. And we're hungry for stories. And we need films like this to be able to tell those stories. Now the reality is, there I go right there with my eyes closed. It's not just about the stories that we can tell, right? It's also about the fact that the destruction of the party destroyed real people. It destroyed real families. It hurt real lives. And so as we reclaim the legacy of the Panthers through film, we're also reclaiming our own stories. We're reclaiming our communities. We're reclaiming everything that we believe in about our chance for a real future. And so I'm so glad that we got to tell the story, and I thank you for having me here today.
Next up is Joan Martinez. Joan, thanks, Mac, for putting all of that and sharing all of your story with us. Joan Martinez is a community engagement project supervisor who's responsible for maintaining and building relationships with community members and organizations on behalf of KQED. Joan, I'm going to just hand it over to you so you can get it going.
All that stuff, we wanted to make sure that went in there, because we have such incredible content and share the content out. So we're really happy to do that. Let me use the clicker. So with content, we're lucky that we have film and archives, and we have all these incredible ways to kind of communicate out there. Our Facebook page sees hundreds of thousands of views daily, so it was really important for us. So the impact on social, so for the local KQED Black Panthers PBS, we had over 3,000 people retweet the information, and the traffic was 270% more than our daily traffic. So people really cared about the topic and really cared to engage online. This is particularly on Twitter, to talk about it. So Stanley gave us a shout out for that page, and so people went and then followed up by looking through the archives and the stories that we had already collected onto that specific microsite. And then the actor Kerry Washington, so we're like, thank you so much. She was actually, people were wondering like, okay, I didn't watch the actual broadcast, but how can I see it again? And so she tweeted it to her 3.6 5 million followers, and so people can tune in and to watch it again, because it's like nowadays it's not just about watching it on TV, even though we like to know about that. It's really about when you can watch it at the time that you can watch it. And so there's a whole other life on video and archives that people can have an opportunity to use. And so it was really important that somebody like her was able to take that information and send it out so that people can watch it. And so all those numbers are wonderful, and it just means that people are actually engaged with the topic. So that leads me into the conversation about community engagement. So here's some pictures from the event that we had. So it was really kind of a conversation along the lines of like, I really wanted this to be important to a lot of people. A lot of if anyone's ever come to one of my events, they know that I really want there to be an engaging part of the conversation. I don't want it to be something you watch and then you go. I want it to be something that you feel. So I think both Ericka and I connected on the fact that I actually used one of her quotes as a preface it for the way that we want to do it. So I'm going to quote you, Ericka, even though you're sitting right here. But you said, we were making history, and it wasn't nice and clean. It wasn't easy. It was complex. So thinking about that, thinking about those words, really said, okay, let's get together. Let's have this kind of conversation. And then how does that transcend over to the experience that the audience is going to have at the Grand Lake Theater? So what that meant was that we partnered up with Youth Speaks, and they provided not only Antique, who's here also, who was part of the entertainment, but also Young Gifted Black, and then specifically the young women in that group. We also work with Vista Festival, Barbara Lee's office, ITVS. We also work with Pandora, who's just down the way, and with their mixtape group. So it's an affinity group within their organization. The San Francisco Film Society, Life is Living, which is another one of Hodari's entities, and then also Facing History. So we broke it up into two. We had a morning plenary with young people, specifically with the African American Male Achievement Organization and Facing History, and other teachers who are interested in this kind of historical dialogue with young people. And that was purposeful because we wanted these young people to have a space for themselves, to just absorb the information, to understand it, and to listen to elders talk about it, but also listen to themselves, discuss it, and watch the film. So that was the morning one. The afternoon one, we were thinking about like, Stanley did a really good job at covering women in this movement. And I was just like, I felt that, that's not always what we hear, and especially with the PBS films that we've shown in the past about the Black Panther movement, we never showcased that. So I was really adamant, on the phone calls, you hear me. I'm always adamant about certain parts that I really want to be spelled out, and that's the part that I really wanted to be spelled out. So we were lucky and privileged to have 3 incredible women speak and talk about their experiences, not only sharing it, but I think the most powerful thing is that we had a young lady in the audience. Her name is Vivian. She's the daughter of Susie, who's our programmer at KQED. And she was just, her mouth was open half of the time. She was just amazed. She's a 6-year-old young African-American girl. And just the fact that she sees heroes, like just back and forth and listening. And she was just so excited that she wrote me a thank you note the next day that I got stuck on my computer screen. And that's why I do this. It's so that some child will say, like, I learned about this from this experiences from my elders, from my past, from my ancestors, and I want to be able to be like that. And so that's why I did it, and that's why I continue to do the work that I do. That's it.
So as Sonya was explaining, ITVS is a media organization that funds and presents documentary films for audiences across the country through public media. We were founded over 25 years ago, and hopefully, as you'll understand by our support of the Black Panthers, what's really important to us is that we help to surface and bring forward underrepresented and unheard voices, both through the programs that we fund and also the programs that we help make their way to broadcast through what we place on Independent Lens, as well as other series like Frontline and POV, and other documentary programs that you'll see on PBS. So as Sonya mentioned, Black Panthers had its television premiere on Independent Lens in February, and it was this film was a record breaker for us in so many cases, which I'm going to talk more about in the course of my time with you. But first and foremost, we reached nearly 4 million viewers during its premiere broadcast week, which is really incredible, and it's the highest ever rated show that we've experienced for Independent Lens, and very high for documentaries on PBS. When we go beyond broadcast and streaming our films online to really reach audiences everywhere we can. And one of the primary ways we do that is through our community engagement initiatives. And so Black Panthers was part of our flagship engagement initiative, which is called Indie Lens Pop-Up, formerly known as Community Cinema for those of you who are familiar. And this series, if you're not aware of it, is a nationwide program where we bring advanced screenings of independent lens films to communities across the country. And what's unique about this film is that we take the traditional movie-going experience and we explode it to be interactive and to really help audiences localize a conversation and look inward into their communities and think about, how does this issue reflect in my own community, what's happening here? What are people doing about it, and what can I do about it to get involved? So because these events are free and open to the public, we really are able to reach people who may not otherwise have a chance to watch the film, let alone be invited to be part of a community dialogue. So as I mentioned, we really try to be interactive with these events. We have panel discussions. We partner through our PBS stations and other community partners to really bring people together who are working on the ground on these issues so that people can understand the local context and learn more about how they can get involved. One of the other unique things about the nationwide reach of this program is that we really are reaching a diversity of communities. So we were in urban centers like Chicago and New York City and LA, but we were also in really small towns like Durango, Colorado, where 0.5% of their population is African American. And in many of these rural communities, they have no other space to watch independent film, let alone be invited to be part of a community dialogue. So with the Panthers, as Sonya mentioned, we really worked in partnership with Firelight and a lot of these partners represented here today to plan way in advance before the broadcast to get people prepared to think about, how am I going to bring this conversation out to my community? These are very sensitive issues, and there's a lot of politics and sensitivities involved with convening these conversations. So working well in a year in advance and really being able to build on the incredible partnerships and the stakeholders and the influencers that Firelight Media was able to bring together was really crucial to our ability to amplify the work and expand the audience and expand the conversation around this film. So when we started talking to PBS stations and our community partners about this film over a year ago, it wasn't a hard sell at all. I think people recognized the importance and the timeliness of the film, but the backbone of a lot of this work that happened in communities across the country were our PBS station partners. There's over 200 stations across the country, and we partner with many of them. And some of you may or may not know, but a lot of these stations really invest heavily in their communities. They're not just broadcasters and not just pushing information and content out one way. They really want to create relationships with their communities. So many of them are taking active leadership roles in addressing, raising high school graduation rates in their communities, addressing the mortgage crisis, and many of them as well are looking at race and social justice and issues of inequality. So when we came knocking on their doors, everyone was really, really eager to sign up, and that was just a really wonderful reaction to see from our colleagues. So fast forward to January 2016, we launched our screening initiative with Indie Lens Pop-Up for Black Panthers in January, about a month and a half before the film came to broadcast. And as I was mentioning all the record-breaking moments with this film, we were in 104 cities, actually 104 screenings in 92 cities around the country, and we brought together through those screenings over 13,000 people. And our average, to just give you a sense of how remarkable that is, our average attendance for a film that we bring out through this national series is about 3,000 people. So the response and the hunger that this showed for these kind of conversations and dialogue was just really evident. A common refrain in the discussions at our events was just really how much people were hungry for a safe and open space for conversation about these issues. Public media is, seen as a very trusted, neutral partner in communities, and so I think it really invited people to feel like they could come and share their minds and speak their truths. And I was really able to, luckily and fortunately, able to attend many different events across the country, and I got to personally witness just the power of people connecting with the story of the Panthers, seeing their experiences reflected on screen, even if it was, decades ago, and feeling the timeliness and the reverberations even today. We surveyed a lot of our audience members across the country. So out of the 13,000 people that came, we had about 3,000 people complete surveys. So, I can tell you that we reached younger, diverse audiences, and the information that we got back from these surveys really do back that up. So about 61% of our audience members were under the age of 49. 64% were women, and 46% of our audience members identified as Black or African American. One of the other things that we've seen both from the surveys and from the 100 or so event reports that I've had a chance to review is that this film was an education for people to learn more about the Panthers and fill in the gaps of what's not taught in our history classes or in mainstream media. One participant in, I want to say it was Texas, said that, she's 60 years old, she said, I spent a whole lifetime believing FBI and Hoover in terms of the narrative of the Black Panthers, and the day that she attended the event and watched the film was her first time really hearing the full story of the Black Panthers. We had another event in Austin, Texas at the public library there, and they shared with us that all of the books and all the DVDs and media that they had related to the history of Black Panthers and the Civil Rights Movement, everything was cleared out and checked out after that event by participants who came to the screening. Our station partners and our community partners also seized on this opportunity to work with us to present these screenings and dialogues to really change the way that their communities came together to talk about race and social inequality. And, they saw it as an opportunity to bring different generations together. So a lot of our screenings, as I mentioned, really reached younger people. But when I look at the photos, and as I've been doing a bad job of advancing, here we go. As I look at the photos, and as hopefully you'll see, the audiences really span from young people, elementary school to seniors. It was just a really wonderful opportunity to bring different generations together. I think we heard feedback from some of the organizers in Chicago that they felt up until that point when they've been at community meetings and other discussions, the young activists felt silenced by some of the older generation. And so with a lot of these events, we were able to bring people together for a different kind of dialogue. And the efforts that our PBS station partners led to bring community members together also really helped to strengthen the work that they do in their local communities. A lot of them reported back to us that they were able to forge new partnerships as a result of their work with Black Panthers and identify new opportunities for collaboration. So in Grand Junction, Colorado, Rocky Mountain PBS noted that they drew their most diverse audience ever in their history of doing events with us, and it's been over, I think, 5 years. And that the new relationships and partnerships with community organizations they developed resulted in an exploration of producing new content for their television stations. So they're now working on a series about local African American community leaders and a historic Black church's legacy and impact on their community. Another quick example I'll share with you is in Tacoma, Washington. They have a new collaboration in progress with several community organizations as well. And the station leaders are now actually regularly attending organizational meetings with all of these activists in their community. Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap up. So just before I end, I just want to close and mention that we had an extraordinary opportunity to work with Firelight to present more national conversations. So a lot of the examples I just shared with you about the localization of the conversation. So we had a chance to present a screening at the Apollo Theater. And Ericka was able to be on the panel with us, as well as Panthers David Lemieux, Kathleen Cleaver, David's daughter Jamila, who's an editor for Ebony and a cultural commentator and critic, And we also were able to feature Jamal Joseph's youth theater, which is called Impact Repertory Group, for a performance at the end of the film. And it was just a remarkable gathering of community members from Harlem and really all over the New York region, and a chance for all these Panthers from across the country to take a step back and help us look at the legacy of the Panthers back then and looking forward today to the social justice movements of today. And what an extraordinary experience it was. It was on Super Bowl Sunday. We were concerned that we were going to be competing with, Super Bowl parties, but we were able to fill the house. As you can see from the photos, over 1,000 people came. And we had the pleasure of watching the Super Bowl game later that night and seeing history unfold with Beyonce and her now legendary performance. And then finally, we were able to present the film on Capitol Hill in partnership with Congresswoman Barbara Lee. So as you heard, she worked with us on the Oakland event here, and was herself actively involved with the Panthers. And she helped us pull together an event on Capitol Hill that drew, again, another record, our largest turnout from congressional members that we've ever had for an event. Usually congressional members come, they make their remarks, and then they leave, and they go off to their other meetings for the evening. But many of the members actually stayed for the whole film and for the conversation after, so it's just another example of how resonant this film is with communities today. So I'm just going to close there. I just want to thank our incredible partners in Firelight for working with ITVS on this extraordinary campaign, and say just what a personal pleasure it was to be a part of this important work. And that's also reflected in the feedback that I've heard from many of our station community partners across the country as well. I've had so many station staff say that this was the most important project they feel like they've contributed to in their careers with public media. So it's been a pleasure to be a part of it. Thank you.
So Chi downplayed it. It was lit. It was like amazing. Was it not the most amazing? It was the Apollo. The Panthers were in the Apollo. The Panthers took over the Apollo. It was amazing. Thank you, Chi, for all of your work and support. So last but not least, we're going to go to Hodari. Hodari Davis is the National Program Director at Youth Speaks and the Executive Producer of Brave New Voices International Youth Poetry Slam Festival. He's a Creative Director of Life is Living. Hodari is essentially connected to every cultural organization in Oakland and the Bay Area. I can't list them all. But Young, Gifted, and Black is another project that Hodari helms, and he's been working with young folks in the Bay Area and across the country, and he did a lot of work around the film. And you are going to kind of close this out because I think we're almost going to close it. We're going to try to have a little space.
I'll speak really quickly.
All right.
So first, thank you. I'm honored to be here on this panel and to be talking about what we accomplished, particularly in Oakland. And I just want to share two of the projects. I mean, Youth Speaks is a big organization. If you check out youthspeaks.org, we got a bunch of stuff on the website. But there's a couple of projects that I'd like to share. One is that annually we produce a festival at Little Bobby Hutton Park, also known as the Infirmary Park, called the Life is Living Festival. We've been doing that for 9 years, and essentially that festival is a celebration of the legacy of the Panthers in Oakland. And we've been able to replicate that festival in different cities around the country. And so a lot of what we've been doing at Youth Speaks for the past 9 years is kind of a reflection of our own pedagogy, is to share the survival programs that the Panthers started and really talk about how that legacy still exists today. When Sonya asked me to present one of the films, I think it was in the fall of last year, I got to sit with Stanley and Emery Douglas, which just blew my mind that I was sitting next to them and asking them questions. I, too, grew up in this very nationalistic, Black Panther-oriented household, so I'm very familiar with that history and that legacy, and so I felt really honored to even be in that conversation. And it was after that conversation that I was like, Sonya, we should show this to young people. How do we make this happen? And I was surprised she said yes, make it happen. And so we called partners in, as many as we could, and everybody was excited. And I was shocked because it was just a random idea that turned into about 1,000 people seeing this film at Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, California. Over half of them were young people under the age of 19, which was super important for us as Youth Speaks. It also provided an opportunity for me to get the young people who are really carrying a lot of that spirit, particularly around expressions of pride and an identity and consciousness and sort of the fight for social justice, to be able to not only introduce them to folks like Ericka Huggins, which was incredible for them, but also for them to actually share the work that they've been doing with the community of people who are obviously engaged and interested based on their interest in the film. So Young, Gifted, and Black made 2 presentations, one in the early show that was for about 500 young people from Oakland, San Francisco, and the Bay. And then the second one was for the community, another 500 to 600 folks from community in Oakland. And luckily, I had 2 groups that were able to share their experience. One of them is highlighted there in that Oakland picture, which is great because I brought a young man who was one of the members of Young, Gifted, and Black, who presented at the first screening, I believe, for the young people in the audience. And when I asked him today, I asked him to come and share some of his poetry, because since that time, he's become a very accomplished poet in the Bay Area. He was a winner of the Teen Poetry Slam. He'll be representing the Bay Area at Brave New Voices. But this young man is 14 years old. Yesterday, he graduated 8th grade at Oakland School for the Arts. And his name is Ajay Wilborn. He's an exceptional young poet. And the last thing I'll say is that I recently took this young man to New York City, where he performed for 1,000 educators from all over the United States at the Coalition for Educating, for Coalition of Schools Educating Boys and Youth of Color. And this is kind of the trajectory from the second Young Black Kings performance that they ever did together, to, going to New York City and presenting in front of educators all over the place. And this young man is a dynamic poet, and I'm just going to leave him to answer the question, what was the impact of this experience on your artistry? Boom.
All right. Hello. I'm Ajay, as he said. And this poem is called Jigaboo. And here we go. We know Jigaboo. And we know nigga. We just black. There ain't nothing wrong with us. What do you see when you look at me? Since pigment is of sun and life, they sentence distance to be home of the outcast. Since my hair is of vine, they thought imperfection was obliged. Since pigment is of sun and life, they thought ignorance was distinctive. Now they looking at us like we don't belong. They looking at us like we did something wrong. Master looking down on what his hatred, pain came when that slash hit. The stories on my back are rather tragic. They've tried so hard to make me see the jigaboo. But you can't make me hate me. You can't take my reflection and make it evil. Ha! Now the cards are turned on you people, because now your mind is tinkering on the edge of destruction because you couldn't handle that great feel. And I must admit, some of our people don't feel it. That's why Kendrick had to make a song about it. You think you can ever make me hate me? I truly doubt it. Because I know that we know jigaboo. And we know nigga. We just black. There ain't nothing wrong with us. See, now my skin is the archetype for creation. From the beginning of time, my mind has been a controller of this universe. My fingertips put seeds in that soil, in upsprouted trees. You see, I'm only 14, moving seas and lifting spirits like you just couldn't believe. Young, gifted, and black is me. Now I'm a young black king. And power is what we bring. We know jigaboo. And we know nigga. We just black. There ain't nothing wrong with us. Thank you.
Thank you.